With us on this special segment of VACo on the Go is Robert Vaughn, Staff Director for House Appropriations. Robert, thank you for being with us for this special segment. I know this is your busy time of the year, and just reporting out the House budget. I want to thank you for your due diligence and your staff, and for, looking out for the Commonwealth and developing a budget plan for us going forward. But also, more specifically, as you know, one of our top issues has been aid to localities, and the restoration of the $45 million that's in the budget. And we thank you for helping us secure that funding, and Delegate Lacey Putney for championing that for VACo and for counties this year. Tell us a little bit, if you will, of the highlights that has come out in the House budget and what we're looking forward to.
Well, I want to start with the aid to locality. Of course, that is in the House budget, but it originated as an amendment by the governor in his introduced budget in December. But its origins, as you know, in terms of eliminating it, began prior to that with the chairman. Chairman Putney is big on what we call structural balancing of the budget. And as we approach the 2013 session, which is a session in which you're making amendments to a underlying budget, that he felt that if there were dollars available, limited as they may be, that we needed to put the emphasis on unwinding more of the structural imbalance as we go into the next biennial budget, which the General Assembly will take up in 2014. It's certainly one of the largest items that I would call a structural imbalance. I think locals would probably agree, and they would also call it a nuisance, was the aid to locality, whereby they were getting back essentially $50 million to the state. So the chairman, as we prepared for the retreat in November, and we talked about the various structural issues, decided that that would be one of the issues that he wanted to champion and urge the committee, the governor, that this is something we needed to eliminate in this budget, take advantage of it. You can't build a budget from scratch with the assumption that $50 million will come back to the state via the local governments. So he was pleased with the governor's action, and I know the governor has given the chairman all the dues and all the props for it. He just, while it was on his agenda, his radar, I think he saw the sincerity of the chairman in his remarks to the committee, encouraging that this had to be a top priority. But there are a lot of other structural priorities that the chairman and the committee then endorsed. As you know, we do have a budget process on appropriations. It's very deliberative, and again, taking sort of a lead from the governor, where he, again, looking ahead to the next biennial budget, we continue to face challenges. Our growth rates are still below our historic trend growth rates in terms of general fund revenues. And the outlook with the uncertainty at the federal level and our heavy reliance on defense spending, we believe that we'll continue to see below trend revenue growth. But at the same time, it's the function of how the Constitution works and the calculation of the rainy day fund that is going to require the General Assembly to appropriate $370 million in the next biennium. So the governor, again, I think wisely, squirreled away $50 million. Could have been easy to spend for the current fiscal year or for fiscal 14, but he knew that that was $50 million less he would have to find next biennium. And so the committee really appreciated, again, that attention to detail, and made as a goal that they too would squirrel away resources, and we were able to do an additional $49 million. So there will be, in the House budget, there's $99 million against the $370 million requirement. And that is big. From a local government perspective, in which 50% of the state money goes back to local governments, the first dollar we're going to have to find is the rainy day fund. So $370 million, now we only have to find $270 million. And I think all stakeholders in the budget process should say that is the right thing to do, because in meeting, you know, the expected re-benchmarking, the expected increases in Medicaid, requirements of the rainy day fund, debt service as we're undertaking about $900 million in capital projects for our colleges and universities, we're going to have again, a challenge. So, and I think the whole theme, again, in the House budget was taking the resources that we have and trying to spend them wisely. The other, I think, issue that the governor certainly led the charge, and the committee, again, supported it and took it one step further, was K-12. And I think this, if there's a segment of spending other than ending the reversion of local monies back to the state in the rainy day, I think it was K-12, and especially with the pay raise. But the committee was very concerned about would they be able to, and so the committee budget, again, with an eye to how can we be flexible with our school systems, with our local governments, is basically pledged that as long as your school divisions certify a pay raise no later than January of 2014, they would be eligible for 11 months of state funding. And that's not typically how it would work. Normally they would get, whenever the pay raise would be granted, if it were January 2014, then they would only get 6 months of funding. If they choose to do it in August of 2013, they'll get 11 months. But we're giving them that flexibility, which essentially has the state buying down the cost of that pay raise in 2014.
I guess that for those cash-strapped localities, that's really a good thing, in that they may not have the entire month, the entire match right up front, or may not have the match for the first 6 months. But as long as they do this by
January
of 14,
they would get 11 months of funding, which essentially changes the dynamic of how much the state is paying.
Well, we think that's a pretty good plan for localities.
Yeah.
I know there are some other things that are unique about the House budget, as far as what you've done, I think, as far as looking at Medicaid and Medicaid reform, Medicaid expansion, and maybe some other unique things you can share with us a little bit.
Yeah, well, Medicaid is, the expansion is something that everybody is aware of. The plight of individuals who do not have insurance, who could otherwise be picked up in this expansion. So you have to balance the reality of individuals in healthcare, but you have to then be responsible to the people who have to pay the bill. And I think one of the concerns is that as Congress continues to wrestle with a deficit, facing sequestration, talking about changing Medicaid and Medicare at the federal level, and of course if they make changes to Medicaid, that's the partnership with the state. So the expectation that if we agree to expansion on the promise that they will pay 100% for the first 3 or 4 years, and then it drops to 90%, well, our match rate for the general program is a 50-50 match rate. So I think, the state wisely needs to be very concerned, because Medicaid a decade ago was about 6% of the state budget, and today it's 22% of the state budget. By comparison, a decade ago, K-12 public education was 34% of the budget, and today it still is 34% of the budget. So where did all that growth in Medicaid, how was it accommodated? Well, while K-12 arguably as a percentage of the budget was not injured, it certainly didn't see the same growth, if you will, in terms of becoming a larger piece of that pie. Likewise, higher education funding suffered greatly. They dropped from about 15% of the budget to now 10% of the budget of state support, and that then was made up with tuition. So, but the committee, and I believe the governor and the Senate, we got to get certain reforms, we got to get certain concessions from the federal government that allow us to make changes to the existing program, not just to the expanded Medicaid population. I think if we can get those assurances, you could probably at least have a heightened comfort level, along with an escape clause that if the federal government were to essentially change its mind on that match rate, that again, the state is empowered to make a different decision on whether or not they would stay in the expanded program. We'll work it out in conference. We're confident of that.
I guess one other issue that I've got to talk about, transportation, just a little bit. I know that in the House plan, you all have taken a look at the governor's plan. I think it basically have endorsed some of the provisions that he had out there, whereas the Senate has nothing out there right now.
Of course, that impasse was broken, so to speak, in terms of the position of the Senate on a number of issues. So time will tell in this next several days what the Senate will do to the Speaker's transportation package that he's carrying on behalf of the governor. Is it the final product that came out of the House? I don't think anybody believes that. I think that you have your two regions in particular, Northern Virginia, Hampton Roads, and the local governments and stakeholders in those areas certainly pushing for regional solutions on top of whatever happens. And I think the Speaker has indicated that that would probably be in a final plan. I think the governor will probably be supportive. I think the one thing, again, where locals sort of took the lead, especially south of Richmond, but even here in the Richmond area, where, again, a number of stakeholders and local governments very concerned about the tolling and the impact it would have on their communities in terms of the cost of the toll for their residents, but also business expansion in those areas. And of course, the House bill has now made an affirmative statement that there would be no tolling. So I think that was sort of a good thing.
Well, I think in looking at the transportation proposals that have been out there, and really what came out of House Appropriations and what came out of Senate Finance, it looks like that it's a foregone conclusion that we're going to use a piece of the general fund for transportation. And while it may be a very small piece, but I think, don't you think that that's, I think we're going to have to use some of the general fund. We've had surpluses over the last several years.
Yeah, well, of course, we've been using general funds since 1986. In fact, on two counts. One, we certainly are funding Route 58 construction and reconstruction of that road on the southern corridor going east to west. Primarily, or a significant amount of general funds were dedicated to that. They're paying debt service. Likewise, we spend general fund dollars in Chesapeake on a road project down there, and then Northern Virginia took their share of the recordation taxes as part of that Route 58 deal back in the 80s, and they do road projects. I think Jerry Bliles, when he was governor, thought that using, quote, general fund dollars for transportation, more specifically the sales tax, was probably appropriate. And of course, the legislature, in addressing transportation back in the mid-'80s, raised the general fund sales tax by half a penny, dedicated solely to transportation. In some respects, I think where the governor is going now is clearly endorsing, I think, what Bliles knew back in the mid-'80s, and that is the gas tax is not a growing source of revenue as the mileage of cars gets better. Even though we're driving more, the fact that our miles per gallon standards have improved dramatically. As a result, on an inflationary basis, our revenue for transportation from the gas tax has been somewhat flat.
It's a regressive tax.
Well, it's one that is, it's not tied to the cost of gas, it's tied to the gallons consumed. And just think of your own, probably driving a Duster back then in the 70s, and now you're probably driving a Toyota, Corolla or Camry or something. So, you went from 12 miles to a gallon to 30 miles. So you're using less gas today. But the way the gas tax works, it's tied to the gallons and not the value. That's the beauty of the state sales tax, and that's what Governor Bliles saw back in the 80s, that if we're going to address transportation, of course he wanted a 1 penny increase in the sales tax for transportation. He only got a half cent. But it is much more inflationary, if you will. Not only from a population standpoint, our state has grown tremendously since the mid-'80s, so from that you have more people paying it, but also it's tied to the cost or the purchase of a product. So the fact that now we're going to migrate another quarter penny, I think is just part of the recognition that general funds in transportation, that is not to wear out a cliche, it's a core function of government. And I think for some, there has to be a sharing of existing resources to solve the problem, not just raising more resources.
I think that most recently in talking to our members, I think they've recognized that transportation is truly a core function of government. Like health and human services, and education, and police, public safety services. What's next for the budget? What stage are we in right now, and what has to happen next for us to get a budget?
Well, the good news is that the Senate is going to join us at the table with their own silverware and plates. That did not happen last year,
right. So
we were glad to see the Senate actually adopt a budget. It will come over to the House. It will sit in this committee, as the traditions of the General Assembly is that we work off the House budget. Next week, the Senate Finance will adopt amendments to that and overlay essentially their committee amendments to the House budget. Send it over, we'll reject it. That will set up the committee of conference. It would be my hope that by next Wednesday or Thursday we'll begin that process. Certainly, the two budgets are not. Anybody who has spent any time over the last week now looking at the two budgets, I think can conclude that they're not far apart. We reached out to Senator Stosh very early, the chairman did, and Delegate Cox, to Senator Stosh, Senator Colgan, to talk about things of interest. What could we find common ground to minimize the differences? So we all agreed that employee compensation, state employees, the teachers, that was going to be a priority. We decided that additional ID and DD waivers for the intellectual disabled community would be in our budgets. We decided that we would embrace a more holistic approach to our capital outlay buildings, if you will. We agreed that this is again a benefit to the local governments, that we would address the upgrades of the wastewater treatment facilities. And so again, no difference for the most part on those issues. So the bottom lines in most of these areas, dollar-wise, are very close. There may be within the spending priorities some differences, but they're all resolvable. I think the one issue that will sit out there will be how do we continue to take the steps towards expansion of Medicaid. And I think there we'll look to the governor to help chart a course that everybody can be comfortable with.
Well, I want to wish you luck in your budget negotiations with the conferees, and thank you for your staff work and really getting into the issues and supporting local government in some of our key things. And thank you for being with us on VACo on the Go on this special segment.
Thank you.
General Assembly session.
Thank you very much.